giornalisti mi hanno ribattezzato Foxy Knoxy. Hanno pubblicato...
Journalists nicknamed me Foxy Knoxy, ran headlines about orgies and sex toys. They played a 3-second clip of Raffaele kissing me to comfort me, zoomed in, slow motion, over and over, for years.
Ingrandita al rallentatore, ripetutamente, per anni.
How did Amanda Knox go from being a naive, fresh-faced girl to some kind of foxy, cunning, unscrupulous woman? Rather quickly, the focus of the story shifts away from Meredith Kircher, the victim. Now the protagonist is the 20-year-old strawberry blonde from Seattle. Outside the site of the murder, Amanda is caught on camera sharing affectionate gestures with Raffaele. She hugs him and they exchange a few caresses. That's enough to say, look, her friend just died and she's kissing her boyfriend.
The whole case sort of harkened back to this Madonna whore dichotomy. And of course, in the Madonna whore story, the Madonna is not as interesting as the whore. And so of course, me being portrayed in the role of the whore became the center of everyone's focus, the center of everyone's vitriol, the center of everyone's projections of their fears and their fantasies and their loathing. And that triggering thing that made you want to engage with the information that was coming your way.
That's Knox, years later, speaking with media expert Michelle Chulla-Lipkin about how she views the dynamic of the public perception of the case. Though she continues to speak widely in the US about her plight as a victim of broken justice system and a voyeuristic media, Knox has been heard far less in Italy. She declined to be interviewed for this investigative podcast for a major national media. Yet whatever her reflections might be now, it was quite evident at the time of the events that Amanda didn't seem to fully understand the consequences of her behavior. The same can be said about her Italian boyfriend. In the early evening, the day after the crime, the couple goes to a clothing store in downtown Perugia. They were laughing and speaking in English, the owner recalls. They stayed for half an hour. They seemed very relaxed, hugging and kissing continuously. The owner describes their behavior as, quote, absolutely exhibitionist. Then they approach the cashier where there are thongs on display. Amanda takes 2, and Raffaele says to her, you can wear them at home later and we'll have wild sex. Her ex-boyfriends describe Amanda to reporters as easy. I met her and we went straight to bed, and then she disappeared, says one. She just wanted sex, she was obsessed with it, reports another. For many, behind her innocent appearance lies a woman who has a deviant side, and this makes her diabolical in the public profile that takes shape in the wake of Meredith's murder. Raffaele Sollecito's lawyer, Giulia Bongiorno, will try to dismantle the widespread image of a cynical and unscrupulous Amanda.
Io credo che in questi anni si sia fatto un
I believe that over time a distorted portrait of Amanda Knox has created a kind of transfiguration, drawing her like Jessica Rabbit, a dominating man-eating character. But in reality, like in the movie, she was drawn like that. The real Amanda Knox is not like that.
Disegnata così, ma Amanda Knox non è così.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Murder in Perugia, an exclusive 7-part podcast series by investigative journalist Antonio Giovane. Episode 4, Beyond Foxy Knoxy.
Anche in relazione a quella esigenza manifestata in particolare dalla difesa di Amanda Knox.
On June 13th, 2009, I was among the journalists crowded together in front of the wooden fence that separated us from the trial scene. The defendants on the right, next to the empty cages usually reserved for dangerous defendants, with the prosecutors on the left and the judge in the center. But at the request of both the prosecution and defense, Judge Masegli asked us to leave the courtroom. We reporters filed out of the courtroom, but without hiding our disappointment. We wanted to see and listen to Amanda, to study her gestures, her words, to try to understand the sincerity of this young woman, now at the center of the world's attention. We retreated to the first floor, where we had to make do with following her testimony by live video feed.
Lei considerava Meredith Kircher un'amica?
Sì.
Did you consider Meredith Kircher a friend?
Yes.
And did you suffer for the loss of this friend?
Yes, I was mostly just really shocked. I couldn't imagine something like that.
Do you ever think about her in your everyday life? Do you ever think about this friend with whom you shared a home?
Yes, I think about her, but in the end, I knew her for a month, and really most of all, I'm thinking about moving on with my life. So yeah, I remember her, and I'm so sorry for what happened. And sometimes it seems like it can't be real.
Mi dispiace tantissimo per quello che è successo e qualche volta sembra che non può essere reale.
Amanda is being questioned by Francesco Maresca, the Kircher family's lawyer. The trial had begun 6 months earlier, covered by 77 different media outlets, mostly Italian, British, and American, with 140 journalists, photographers, and videographers, and it's a true battle for justice. Patrick's involvement in the murder was proven false. Still, the American defendant was questioned about the situation described. Patrick and Meredith went to a secluded spot while she remained in the kitchen. Hearing Meredith's screams and covering her ears, the neighbor Nara Capezzali had claimed to have heard a scream, but she testified 21 days after Amanda's statement. How did the American girl know that Meredith had let out that piercing scream? On June 12, 2009, Amanda was questioned by lawyer Carlo Pacelli, who was defending Lumumba.
Signorina Amanda, senta, lei la sera del 1 novembre 06...
Miss Amanda, listen. Did you hear poor Meredith scream on the evening of November 1st, 2007?
No.
In the report dated June 11, 2007 at 5:45 a.m., you stated that before she died, you heard Meredith scream. How did you know that Meredith screamed before she was killed? Who told you?
So when I was with the police, they asked me if I heard Meredith's screams. I said no. And they said, but how come you didn't hear Meredith's screams if you were there? And I said, look, I don't know, maybe my ears were blocked. And they said, okay, let's write it like this, and then it's fine.
E hanno detto va bene, scriviamo così e poi va bene.
Amanda's response is evasive, one might say. The defendant from Seattle appears more and more confused. Pacelli presses on.
Io le faccio presente che alla data del 6 di novembre...
I would like to point out that on November 6, the police did not know that Meredith had screamed before dying.
I imagine they could think that.
Did you cover your ears before Meredith died?
No.
Why did you declare on November 6 at 5:45 a.m. that before she died, you had covered her ears?
In my confusion under the impressions of the police, I had to try to follow a reasoning that they suggested, and that would be that I would have heard Meredith scream. The fact that I didn't remember this fact, they suggested that maybe I would plug my ears. So I followed this suggestion.
Che forse avrei attappato le orecchie, per cui ho seguito questo suggerimento.
That gesture, the hands on the ears as if not wanting to hear a scream, is brought up again in court on June 13, 2009, along with another reaction. It's prosecutor Mignini recalling the inspection of Via della Pergola on November 4, 2007. Why? While they were examining the kitchenware in the house, did she put her hands over her ears?
Essendo nella casa, dovendo proprio guardare.
Being in the house, having to actually look to see if anything was missing that could be used to kill someone, it really hit me. It was like I couldn't even accept the fact that Meredith was actually killed. The situation was so heavy. I don't know, it just hit me.
When they were looking at the knives, you got upset.
Yes, I was upset. It made an impression on me.
Sì, avevo un turbamento, mi ha fatto impressione.
And if Amanda hadn't had access to Meredith's room, how could she have said that Meredith was inside the closet, wrapped in a blanket? Her answer is simple. She had heard people saying it outside the house after the murder.
Tutti stavano parlando soprattutto del fatto di quello che hanno visto dentro la camera, perché io ho pensato un piede.
Everyone was talking mostly about what they saw inside the room because I thought a foot. But what foot? There was a foot inside Meredith's room. Then Raffaele had to ask some people for me to explain what they saw. We heard that there was a corpse inside the closet, covered by a blanket with a foot outside. And this is the image that I understood from the situation, that there was this corpse inside the closet, closed inside the closet, but that there was a foot coming out. This is what I'd understood.
Un piede che usciva fuori, e questo è che ho capito.
And again, why in Capanne prison on November 17, 2007, when her parents went to visit her, did Amanda said at a certain point, "It's stupid. I can't say anything else because I know I was there, and I can't lie about it."
Ti ricordi questo colloquio?
Certo.
Che volevi dire? Io ero lì.
Do you remember this exchange?
Right.
You meant I was there, but where was there?
Exactly. I was at Raffaele's apartment, and I wasn't afraid to say it.
So when you said I was there, you meant you were in Raffaele's house?
Yes.
Ero nella casa di Raffaele.
Sì.
There, Amanda reports, is not the house on Via della Pergola, but Raffaele's house. Among the many things Amanda tries to explain to the judges is that famous scene of her doing cartwheels at the police station.
Secondo me tutti affrontano una tragedia in modo loro.
I think everyone deals with a tragedy in their own way, and this is the way I felt most reassured. Because in the end, I felt very, very, very scared by this thing. Very shocked. I didn't know how to deal with the situation. For me, it was surreal, and I still had to accept the fact that it happened.
Per me era surreale e ancora dovevo accettare il fatto che è successo.
Even the prosecutor Giuliano Mignini offers credence to the American on this matter.
Questi atteggiamenti un po' stravaganti di Amanda.
In my opinion, in Italy we didn't fully understand these somewhat extravagant attitudes of Amanda. Also in England. We made a big deal out of them when instead they are probably behaviors aimed at easing the tension. She probably made these gestures to let off steam.
Lei ha fatto questi gesti probabilmente per scaricarsi.
Mignini also tells me about another curious episode.
Poco prima, durante uno dei sopralluoghi che noi facevamo.
Shortly before, during one of the inspections we did at the house, Amanda was there. It was me and Deputy Commissioner Giobbi. We were looking at the outside of the house when at a certain point Giobbi says to me, Sir, look at what Amanda is doing." I hadn't seen her. I looked at her. She had her hands on her hips and was moving her hips and smiling at us. Let's say she was trying to let off steam, to ease the tension in this way. Very good. People, in my opinion, just couldn't understand her. And from that moment on, a demonization of this girl began by many people. I fully recognize it, though it was not the case for me.
Demonizzazione di questa ragazza, io lo riconosco pienamente, non da parte mia.
But Amanda's rather strange behavior during those days is intriguing. She didn't seem to feel any emotion, says Amy Frost, a friend of the English girl, and there are many other things that don't add up. Amanda showered in that house, despite the blood in the bathroom. She had also taken a shower the day before at Raffaele's house. There's the testimony of Marco Quintavalle, the owner of a Conad supermarket, who says he saw Amanda enter at 7:45 on the morning of November 1st, while the two young people had reported being sleeping until 9. Raffaele's DNA is on the bra clasp, and Amanda and Meredith's DNA is on the handle and blade of the knife found at Raffaele's house. And when the defense requests a genetic analysis of this evidence, super partes, because they foresee the risk of contamination, a circumstance that would render the expert opinion invalid, the judge says no. But when did Meredith die? There will never be any scientific certainty about the time of death. When I asked Giuliano Mignini if he had a regret, he replied, yes, that he hadn't asserted himself when it came to measuring Meredith's temperature immediately after her body was discovered. There are, in fact, several ways to determine the time of death. The most precise is measuring temperature. After death, a body's heat loss follows a precise temporal pattern. But Meredith's temperature was measured only 11 hours after her discovery.
Successe questo, era l'imbrunire. Arrivò il medico legale, dottor Lalli.
This is what happened. It was dusk when the coroner, Dr. Lalli, arrived, and I told him to go and measure the rectal temperature, which would determine with a certain precision the time of death. He said he'd take care of it if all was okay. But then Dr. Stefanoni comes out of the house and says, let's do it later. Let's postpone the measurement of the rectal temperature because there's a risk of contamination, and I wouldn't want to have an investigation that is then contested for that.
Accertamento che poi viene impugnato.
Mignini asked Luca Lalli to take the victim's temperature, but Patrizia Stefanoni asked for the operation to be postponed to avoid contaminating the crime scene. Mignini complied with the request.
Poi, passato un certo tempo, perché io a un certo punto...
Then after a while, because at a certain point I said, listen, I'm fed up, you go and take your rectal temperature, no matter what the doctor tells you. If there were another chance, I wouldn't have listened to Dr. Stefanoni for this test.
Non avrei dato ascolto alla dottoressa Stefanoni.
The temperature measurement taken 11 hours after Meredith's death yielded a very wide range, between 8 p.m. on November 1st and 4 a.m. on November 2nd. The intermediate value was used, resulting in the time of death being around 11 p.m. But these times are too approximate. Establishing Meredith's time of death, however, would be crucial. If the murder had occurred before 9:26 p.m., at least Sollecito would have an alibi, since his computer was active until that time. If it had occurred later, when the computer was inactive, then no. Through evidence, tests, and testimony, the prosecution will tend to move the time of death toward 11:30 p.m. The defense, however, will insist on moving it to 10 p.m. Another method used was stomach analysis. By tracking the food's digestion, it's possible to determine the time interval between death and the last meal. According to pathologist Luca Lalli, the first to arrive on the scene, the girl's death occurred between 9 and 9:30 p.m. At the latest, 10 p.m. Considering that Raffaele's computer is active until 9:26 p.m., in just over half an hour, the defendants would have had to leave the house, reach Via della Pergola, 400 meters away, and kill Meredith. Unlikely. Furthermore, we know that the English girl called her mother at 8:56 p.m., but the call didn't go through. The defense maintains that it's inconceivable that the English girl, always worried about her mother's poor health, didn't call her back shortly afterward. A sign that shortly after, Meredith was already dead. But the magistrates rely on two witnesses, Nara Capezzali, who claimed to have heard a scream, and then the footsteps of several people, between 11 and 11:30 p.m., and someone else who swore to have seen Amanda and Raffaele.
Mi chiamo Curatore Antonio, nato a Semerchia il 2656.
Avellino, 2656, senza fissa dimora.
Senza fissa dimora.
Antonio Curatolo has been homeless since 2000 and is known to use heroin. He had made spontaneous statements to prosecutor Mignini on February 2, 2008. He calls himself a Christian anarchist and says he chose the life of a homeless man to live like Christ. He spends his days on a bench near the newsstand in Piazza Grimana and recognized the young couple. Curatolo says he saw them arrive at 9:30 p.m.
Dopo un po', però dopo sono spariti, diciamo, dopo che sono partiti gli autobus.
After a while, though, after the minibuses that took these two kids to the disco left, this would have happened between 11:30 and sometime after midnight.
Tra le 23 e dopo mezzanotte.
Sì.
The pair, however, disappeared after the shuttles that take them to the disco departed. During the trial, Curatolo will advance the time to 11:30 p.m., a sign, according to the prosecution, that Raffaele and Amanda hadn't stayed home at all. But his testimony is a double-edged sword for the prosecution. If the two young people had remained in that square until 11:30 p.m., they couldn't have been on Via della Pergola between 11 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., the time Nara Capezzali heard the scream. And there's another witness who will support the defense. Pasqualino Coletta's car broke down very close to the house, in front of the entrance to the Sant'Antonio parking lot, and was stuck there between 10:30 and 11:30 p.m., the time the tow truck arrived, and he maintains that nothing unusual happened at that time. There was also the testimony of Hekuran Kokomani, an Albanian youth who claimed to have seen Amanda, Raffaele and Rudy on the evening of November 1st between 8:30 and 8:40 p.m. in front of the house on Via della Pergola. But this witness will prove to be unreliable and irrelevant, and will be excluded from the proceedings. Kokomani himself had claimed to have seen the young American woman and her Italian boyfriend in July, along with Amanda's American uncle. In July, however, Amanda was in America, and she had not yet met Raffaele. I was there on December 5, 2009, when Judge Giancarlo Massei, shortly after midnight, read the sentence against Amanda and Raffaele.
Li condanna alla pena di anni 26 di reclusione da Knoxy e alla pena di anni 25 in sollecito.
I still have the notes from that evening after the verdict. I wrote that Amanda was sitting in the first bench on the right, near the cage for dangerous defendants. She studied the code and knows that the article numbers read by the judge mean guilty. She begins to sob. While the sentence is being read, we hear only Massei's words and Amanda's sobs. Raffaele, 2 benches to the left, stares at his lawyer, Giulia Bongiorno, who places a hand on his shoulder. He's lost and waiting for the lawyer to explain what he already knows. Meanwhile, Amanda is in tears. Her lawyer, Luciano Girga, finds her a corner on his robe where she can rest her head and cry. Raffaele, however, shows no sign of reaction. Bongiorno continues to hold her hand on his shoulder. Then he turns and signals to the family members at the back of the courtroom to stay calm. A few meters away is the victim's family. They all nod: father, mother, sister, and 2 brothers. Amanda's younger sister has gone pale, feels faint, and is made to lie down on a bench. Massey has the courtroom cleared. Raffaele tries to slip out without anyone noticing. His mother, before he leaves, lets out a cry from the depth of her throat, saying, "Stay strong, Raffaele." Then she collapses on the bench and cries. Amanda is escorted out. Her lawyer hugs her. Her mouth is frozen in a silent scream, her eyes closed. I write in my notes that her face reminds me of an early Renaissance fresco, the face of Eve in Masaccio's The Expulsion from the Garden of Eden. I watch some boys and girls dribbling on the concrete basketball court in Piazza Grimana. Many of them are foreigners of African origin. They are warming up before starting the game. Near the small court, on 3 sides of the pedestrian area, there are some benches. On one of them lived Antonio Curatolo, the homeless man who claimed to have seen Amanda and Raffaele in Piazza Grimana. The homeless man will always be rather vague about the time he lost sight of the young couple. 11 p.m., 11:30 p.m., before midnight, after midnight. According to the ruling, Curatolo observed Raffaele and Amanda sometime between 9:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. After that time, according to the judge's reconstruction, the couple was at Via della Pergola. They let Rudy into the house and he went to the bathroom. When he came out, he entered Meredith's room, who had left the door open, and began making advances towards the English girl, who refused. Amanda and Raffaele, who were in her room, were drawn in by the voices and entered Meredith's room where they helped Rudy. It was, the investigators said, a bad choice, and it began with marijuana use and then continued thanks to the sexual stimulation of the situation. Moreover, on his blog, Raffaele had written that he was looking for strong emotions. Meredith protests and is grabbed around the neck by Sollecito, increasing the violence. The girl resists. A struggle begins. Meredith is stabbed on the right side of her neck with the knife that Sollecito always carries with him. The wound is 4 centimeters long. Her panties and pants are removed, and Rudy forces his fingers into her. They try to remove her bra and finally cut it off. A pillow is placed under her buttocks. Meredith screams in pain and violence, and that scream is heard by Nara Capezzali between 11 and 11:30 p.m. Another witness, Antonella Monacchia, also reports a scream. She says she went to bed around 10 p.m. and heard it after a while, coming from Via della Pergola. To silence Meredith, say prosecutors, Amanda covers her mouth with one hand and stabs her with another knife, the one found in Raffaele's house, on the left side of her neck. It would be the fatal wound. To divert suspicion, the burglary scene was simulated. It's clear that it was simulated. Filomena's window requires a 3.5-meter climb to reach, and there are no signs of climbing. But most importantly, the glass is found on top of objects and clothing that had been ransacked in the room. This is a sign that the room had been ransacked before the window was broken. The staged attack was not attributable to Rudy, but to someone in the house who wanted to divert suspicion. Filomena and Laura were not there, only Amanda remained. In front of the courthouse in Piazza Matteotti, there aren't just hundreds of journalists after the verdict. There's also a crowd.
Vergogna! 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 Vergogna!
Vergogna, vergogna, shame, shame, the crowd chants. According to the judges, they carried out the murder, Raffaele and Amanda. We're in shock, comments Edda Mellas, the American girl's mother.
We told her she's going to get out of here. It's going to take a little longer.
Is she strong? A journalist asks her. She's strong, the woman replies. The Kircher family, meanwhile, is holding a press conference. The parents, the sister, and 2 brothers. Lyle Kircher speaks.
You know, it's not a time for celebration at the end of the day. You know, it's not a moment of triumph. And
in the United States, thousands of miles away, the perception of what was happening in Italy was clear. Amanda was caught up in a murder investigation. She was in a foreign country, and she was convicted despite her innocence.
I want to ask you about the case of Amanda Knox, the American college
Hillary
student
Clinton,
who's convicted.
US Secretary of State under President Obama, is in the ABC studio interviewed by journalist George Stephanopoulos. He asks her about Amanda Knox. Stephanopoulos takes his cue from statements by Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell, who said Amanda was the victim of anti-Americanism and convicted despite a clear lack of evidence. The question is, what do you think of this sentence?
George, I honestly haven't had time to even examine that. I've been immersed in what we're doing in Afghanistan. Of course, I'll meet with Senator Cantwell or anyone who has a concern.
Though she chose her words carefully, it is clear that the highest realms of power in the US were ready and willing to activate on Knox's behalf. Even more forceful was the reaction of Donald Trump, who at the time was a mere celebrity tycoon.
I'll never go to Italy as long as Amanda Knox is in jail. She's not guilty.
These statements capture the mood of many Americans. Italy is condemning an innocent American. The day after the verdict, the leaders of Seattle broke the Twin City agreement with Perugia. Much of the vitriol was directed at prosecutor Mignini.
È stata creata questa narrativa che è stata poi imposta a livello.
This narrative was created and spread by the media across the world. Amanda is the pure one, the good American girl next door, victim of perverse Europe and of a medieval investigator, that would be me, and of a medieval city, that would be Perugia.
Non ce la fanno, non ce la. Io ho spiegato, provato, ma non.
The prosecutor says that when he asks for the defendants to be sent to trial, he received a letter.
Una lettera in caratteri goticheggianti.
A letter in Gothic script from the Superior Court of Washington, Judge Michael Heavey, Vietnam veteran who had a daughter who attended the Jesuit school in Seattle and was a classmate of Amanda. He prefaced his message with his blessing, the way Americans always do, some biblical quote. He tells me that he was convinced of Amanda's innocence. Amanda was innocent, and therefore, if you make sure she is acquitted, you will be a hero for the Americans. But if you instead don't do it, he intimates that Americans won't remember him at all. It was a discourse of veiled threats.
Lui non dice che gli americani se lo ricorderanno, fa un discorso velatamente minaccioso.
Mignini defends himself by writing to Italy's Profession Magistrate Union and registers the threats he was receiving. Some colorful characters also sent him messages.
Poi ho ricevuto lettere.
I received threatening letters. There was even a professional wrestler. When I received a letter, I asked my police detail where they were from. Okay, letters from the United States you open, from the UK I open them. The conversation is more relaxed there.
Dal Regno Unito le apriamo noi, lì è più tranquillo il discorso.
The trial thus seems to be turning into a US-UK match, and the bizarre events don't end there. On Via Mazzini, in Perugia, Mignini encounters an American journalist.
Mi fa le domande sulle streghe. Sulle streghe, mi dice, ma le streghe...
She starts asking me questions about witches. I say to her, excuse me, what are you talking about? And she says, but what about Perugia? Perugia? There have never been witches in Perugia. There was no witch trial. It never happened in Perugia. Instead, I see that in Massachusetts, in Salem, there have been many. She got offended and left.
Troppi ce ne sono stati. Si è offesa e se n'è andata via.
In June 2022, when director Paul Haggis was placed under house arrest on charges of raping a 30-year-old English woman, his colleague Oliver Stone gave an interview to Italy's La Repubblica newspaper. I know there's a thorough investigation underway, said Stone. He then added, no one wants an Amanda Knox-style case. The image of the Perugia investigation, at least in the US, had become a kind of shorthand for miscarriage of justice. Amanda and Raffaele are declared guilty. On appeal, however, something happens that radically changes the case. The day of redemption will arrive for the two young defendants.
Questa è già una mezza vittoria.
This is already half a victory. Let's hope we get the full one. Let's go.
Va bene, noi basta questo.
Murder in Perugia is a podcast by Antonio Giovane. The English language edition is a co-production of One Podcast and World Crunch, with editorial supervision by Anna Silvia Zippel and Jeff Israeli. Production support Paolo Prosperini, Giacomo Aloisi, Emma Albright, Erwan Isanchou, and Laurie Gaucher. Post-production and automated voice matching of Antonio Giovane's English narration by Odia.